So this is the clip that I wanted to end the last video with. The clock all cased up and working, ticking away. There are some issues that remain. Well, one issue that remains. Obviously, I figured out, before I get to the issue, obviously I figured out what was binding it up and what was causing it to stop. It was a rather simple thing. There was some levers in the repeating mechanism that were interrupting or engaging with one of the gears on the dial side and preventing it from turning. So it stopped the whole mechanism. It once I addressed that issue, I ran it 3 days, and it ran the full cycle, no problems, no issues. I thought it rather peculiar that it only ran for about 23.5 hours, not a full day, a full cycle. And so I put it in the case, and with the hands on it, hung it up just like this, and ran it for a full day and discovered why it doesn't run for a full day. And that is because it runs about 15 minutes fast in an hour. So in its own timekeeping ability, it runs about between 29 and 30 hours. But it runs so fast that it's done actually in less than 24 hours. So there's a couple things that I can do to address this, and I will do those. But at this point, with this next time that I take this apart, I'm going to start working on the alarm mechanism, and so I'll show you that here shortly. And every time then after that I reassemble it and run it to test the alarm and test the repeater, I'll continue to test and adjust its timekeeping ability then too. So I've taken this back out of the case again, and I thought I would give a little introduction to how I'm going to proceed with the alarm mechanism and explain what's missing, and we'll go from there. First of all, I've already taken out the mainspring and the star cam, or the star wheel. The alarm mechanism fits right here. The mainspring goes in this pivot hole. The star cam, star wheel goes here. Then we have 1, 2, 3 pieces that are missing, and then we have the hammer that's completely missing here as well. This hole is actually a screw hole for attaching the mainspring. It screws to the bottom, or to the plate. So the screw comes up through the bottom, through this point right here, and screws into that hole. But the mainspring goes right in that pivot hole. This is what I call the star wheel. The star wheel. And then, like I said, the others are missing, including the hammer, which interacts with the star wheel. And this is the and then the rest of the mechanism is on the dial side, and I think the pertinent parts are all there. These two gears are pretty straightforward, just like the ones that we are, the one that we already made, only they're not contrate wheels, they're standard flat gears. But they're wheel pinion combination. So there's 4 parts right there. We need to make the top bushing here and a pinion, and I'll explain that in a little bit, as well as the hammer. So there's at least 6 parts there, 6 or 7 parts. I thought I would explain this part of the mechanism because this is the regulating device for the alarm. There's one over here for the repeater as well, and you can see that it's missing the same parts. And this regulates how fast the hammer dings the bell. And what I have here that I want to show you is it's a pocket watch that I have. This is a repeater pocket watch that I had. Matter of fact, the first time you emailed me, Pete, I thought that this was. It looks very similar. You know, I thought that this was probably just a pocket watch. I didn't realize that it was as big as it is. But this, you can tell by the design, the layout, and everything that that it's actually same vintage, very similar in construction. Of course, this being a pocket watch as opposed to a wall clock. But the thing that I want to point out to you is, and I'm going to have to play with to get it in focus, and I'll zoom in upon it. There we go. Is down here we have the same degrees with the L and the V, and then this part here, which is missing on your piece, and of course the pointer that points to. This is the speed control, and what it is, see, there's a good visual. Note this square point right here. So this is a square. This is a eccentric bushing, and that hole it's not centered, and you can so you can shift the position of the pivoting. Now on the inside, and let's see if I can get that, show you that, get it in focus. Back this out just a little bit. Probably too close to the camera. Anyway, forgive me for bouncing around like I am. So what we have here is just the wheel before is just a standard wheel pinion combination down here. And it is interacting with this last gear of the gear train is simply just a pinion. And I don't know how many teeth this one has. It's irrelevant at this point. So when you're moving this eccentric pivot hole, the bushing, you are, like we already discussed and learned with the time train, you are affecting the engagement between the wheel and the pinion and how deep the teeth engage with one another, thereby affecting how smoothly the gears mesh and how fast they mesh. If they're meshed perfectly, it will run really fast, you know, free, very free. But if they're too close or too far, they will start grinding, eventually to a point of binding, but they will slow down before they bind up completely. And this is how in the early repeaters speed control was accomplished. And so that's basically what we have to do, both on the repeating mechanism over here as well as the alarm mechanism. So the part that is missing, we have the bushing here, the eccentric bushing, which is just brass. And of course, poking out of there is going to be a little pointer that tells you how far it's engaged. But underneath between the plates, it is just simply a pinion. So we have to, and so my next step is, because I've got the mainspring in it, mainspring gear, and the star wheel, my next step is just to work down the train to this. And so my next step, first thing that I'll accomplish, is sitting down with the star wheel, making measurements and calculations, and figuring out, what size of pinion we need to engage with this wheel right here. Once we get the pinion made, then we'll figure up something based on the distance between these two, how big a diameter wheel we can use, and we'll just work our way down the train. So that's how we're going to proceed. So I thought I would give you this update video real quick. I've gone ahead and attempted twice to make the pinion that I said we would proceed on. And the second time I made it turned out to be just downright awful. The first time I made it, this was the first one that I made, and it actually works with and meshes with the wheel, and it works. But I'm not satisfied with it for a number of reasons. And so I thought I would go ahead and try and make the pinion a second time using a different cutter, and that turned out worse than the first. And something that I had to do on the first pinion that I made a few videos ago was when I cut the leaves of the pinion, the various, see if I can get this to focus, but the various, so this is a 6-leaf pinion. So when I cut the leaves of the pinion, I actually had to do it in a series of 3 cuts. First cutting the channel between the leaves, and then cutting the rounded ends or the profile of the leaves. And I did that the same way with this one, the first one. But I ended up, the pinion leaves are too thin, and the overall diameter, once I installed it, or once I lined it up and meshed it in a depthing tool, they aren't as fat. They're too slender, and the overall diameter is not as, I think it could be just a slightly larger, just to fill up the gap a little bit. It does work, but there's some pretty serious grinding. You can hear the teeth. It makes a grinding sound, which, it works, but it's just not, I'm not satisfied with it. So I took the cutter, which is just a fly cutter, that I used to cut the profile or the tips of the teeth on this one, and I tried to use that to cut the whole pinion all together with this. And the fly cutter was originally intended for cutting a brass gear and not a steel pinion, and I ended up both destroying the fly cutter as well as not being able to cut the pinion. This pinion is actually worse than the first. And so as I explained in my first one of my first videos, and I forget which one it is, that the size of this gear is a little bit larger than what I'm accustomed to. Most of the gear cutters that I have are intended for watch size gears, and this is a small clock. So the reason why I'm struggling to cut a good pinion is because, to be perfectly honest with you, I do not have the appropriately sized gear cutter for this. And So what I'm going to do in my next video is I am going to, instead of try a third time to make a pinion, I'm going to design and make a cutter, a pinion cutter that will be appropriately sized and have all the right dimensions and profiles. This is kind of the least preferred way that I want to go about this, because obviously it's time consuming. It's time consuming in the respect that I've already made 2 attempts at this part, but it's also time consuming in that I have to make the tool that makes the part now. On the upside of this, I'm hopeful that in making this cutter, I'm not going to be using that cutter for just making one gear, but then I could use it for making other gears in this mechanism, other pinions in this mechanism that are going to need to be made. So I'll be able to make more than one part out of this piece that I'm going to make now. So the next video that I make, I'll just take you through the process I use to make the cutter, and then hopefully at the end of that video I will demonstrate the use of that cutter and hopefully making a pinion that is to my satisfaction and would look right and appropriate to the mechanism. And again, these two are just, I'm not satisfied with them. So like I maybe touched on earlier, having a working and functioning mechanism is different than having one that is properly restored and looks like it's original. And it's going to be hard to make something that looks original and functions like original without stopping and making this cutter. So that's going to be my next step.